Before we begin this portion of our session, I will let you know that this will be a regular portion of our Inquiries conversations. As such, this is an introductory look at the language we use when speaking about and with the queer community and individuals. Many of you may be familiar with the terminology I will present today, which is just fine. The Affirming Ministry Task Group wants to make sure that everyone is working with the same information and understanding, and that requires learning or relearning the basics. The language or languages we use constantly change, and what was once accepted terminology is no longer appropriate. Thus, I will do my best to ensure that all the information is up to date. I am offering this information as a conversation opener, so make sure you write down your questions and save them for the Q&A session at the end of the slides. Finally, queer people have been around as long as humans have existed, so these experiences are not new for people. However, due to many factors, including legal and religious ones, our global North society has only just begun to embrace queer people as a regular part of society. Affirming terms and definitions. The basics. Sex, sexual orientation, and gender are different categories of identity, though they are linked. Sexual orientation. The type of sexual, romantic, and/or physical attraction someone feels towards others. Often labels based on the gender identity or expression of the person and who they are attracted to. Sexuality. Heterosexual. A woman attracted to a man or a man attracted to a woman. Also called straight. Homosexual. A clinical term for people who are attracted to members of the same sex. Some find this term offensive. Homosexual is offensive to some because it has been used in medical practice to label someone as, quote, defective or, quote, mentally unstable, leading to a variety of terrible consequences for people. This is an okay term to use in general, yet there are more specific terms that are often better. Lesbian, a woman that is primarily attracted to another woman. Gay, a person who is attracted primarily to members of the same sex. Although it can be used by anyone, for example, gay man, gay woman, gay person, it tends to be used by men. Gay women tend to refer to themselves as lesbians. Bisexual, bi, a person who is attracted to multiple genders. Despite having the prefix bi, or bi, which indicates two, bisexual people do not only have relationships with just two genders. This will become more clear with the next definition. Pansexual, a person who experiences sexual, romantic, physical, and/or spiritual attraction for members of all gender identities/expressions, not just people who fit into the standard gender binary, meaning men and women. While bisexual refers to many genders, pansexual refers to all genders. There is a debate about the use of both of these terms in the queer community, yet both are acceptable. Asexual, a person who generally does not feel sexual attraction or desire to any group of people. Asexuality is not the same as celibacy. Asexuality, like all sexual orientations, exists on a spectrum. There are various, very specific terms to describe someone's asexuality, a topic for another session. It is very important to note, however, that asexuality is not about the choice to not have a sexual relationship or get married or date. Asexuality is a sexuality just like heterosexuality, bisexuality, or any other form of sexual orientation. Gender identity, the sense of being female, male, non-binary, agender, etc. For some people, gender identity is in accord with their physical anatomy. For transgender people, gender identity may differ from physical anatomy or expected social roles. Gender identity, biological sex, and sexual orientation are separate, and you cannot assume how someone identifies in one category based on how they identify in another category. For example, a transgender man married to a woman might identify his sexuality as heterosexual and his gender as trans. Gender expression, a term which refers to the ways in which we all present our gender to the world. It is usually an extension of our gender identity, our innate sense of being female, male, non-binary, etc. This includes everything from the clothes we wear, to the way we walk, to the groups to which we belong. A note about biological sex. Though we are not going into detail today about biological sex, I wanted to take a moment to make a note. When we talk about biological sex, or sex at birth, we need to note that there are more than just the two chromosomally defined sexes that we are familiar with, XX as female and XY as male. Medical science has defined at least 27 chromosomal markers of sex, though they are not all fully explored. Gender binary, the idea that there are only two genders, female and male. This binary has been and continues to be used by society to dictate such things as what clothes are appropriate for whom, what emotions are acceptable to show, what jobs can be done by certain people based on gender, and what families are supposed to look like. The gender binary is restrictive and does not allow for people to genuinely express themselves in every aspect of their lives. Cisgender, gender identity where an individual's experience of their own gender matches the sex they were assigned at birth. For example, a cisgender woman has the secondary sex characteristics at birth that are typified as female, and the woman also experiences herself as a woman. Transgender. This term has many definitions. It is frequently used as an umbrella term to refer to all people who do not identify with their assigned gender at birth or the binary gender system. Some transgender people feel they exist not within one of the two standard gender categories, but rather somewhere between or outside the gender binary. Transsexual. A person whose gender identity is different from their biological sex, who may undergo gender-affirming medical treatments and/or surgery, oftentimes to align it with their gender identity. I added this term because it is still used, though it is generally only used when someone requests they be referred to as transsexual. We do not use transvestite as it has anti-gay connotations. It is best to stick with transgender when speaking about another person. Intersex. A person whose sexual anatomy or chromosomes do not fit with the traditional markers of female and male. For example, people born with both typical female and male anatomy, or people born with XXY chromosomes. This term is used instead of hermaphrodite. There is a lot of discussion about using surgery to fix the problem, quote unquote, of having so-called ambiguous genitalia. On the whole, intersex people are mostly in favor of not having, quote unquote, corrective surgery, as they do not see themselves as having any issue to correct, simply another gender identity. Non-binary. Non-binary people have a gender identity that does not fit into the male-female binary. They are often included under the umbrella term of transgender. And while transgender and non-binary people are often discussed as a group, there are many distinct genders within this group. Just as with asexuality, non-binary people are not a monolithic group, and there are many terms that more specifically describe a non-binary person's gender. These will be presented at another inquiries session. Two-spirit. This term reflects complex indigenous understandings of gender roles, spirituality, and the long history of sexual and gender diversity in indigenous cultures. Individual terms and roles for two-spirit people are specific to each nation. The word two-spirit was created in the early 1990s by a group of two-spirit community members and leaders. Due to its cultural, spiritual, and historical context, the concept of two-spirit is to be used only by Indigenous people. However, not all Indigenous people who hold diverse sexual and gender identities consider themselves two-spirit, many identifying as LGBTQ+. Queer, an umbrella term sometimes used by LGBTQ+ people to refer to the entire LGBTQ+ community. The word queer is an in-group term, and a word that can be considered offensive to some people, depending on their generation, geographic location, and relationship with the word. Due to its history as a slur, there are LGBTQ+ community members who never use it and do not identify with the word queer. This word has been reclaimed by the LGBTQ+ community, and therefore should only be used by members of that community unless you're given permission by someone to specifically call them queer. Questioning. For some, the process of exploring and discovering one's own sexual orientation, gender identity, or gender expression.